Well, the rain is coming down here in Washington, D.C. outside the White House. A little British farewell for the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who's just left here from the White House in the last 10 minutes or so. Interestingly, we saw President Trump come out just a moment ago, back out through that portico of the West Wing with some members of the ground staff here at the White House, seemingly examining the granite on the ground. So I'm not too sure, couldn't tell from this vantage what they were looking at, but he's finished meeting with Keir Starmer and now he's concerned about the grounds in the White House. A day in the life of an American president. And we can just see now behind me, that's the US or the travelling UK press pack who have travelled over here with the Prime Minister. They're just leaving there behind us there. The Prime Minister left from a different entrance at the front of the White House there. A lot going on here today, as you can imagine. And we've just finished that press conference, which was the last official moment of the visit of Keir Starmer to Donald Trump. And of course, the issue of Ukraine and security underpinning for any potential peace deal that may arise was discussed. And this is a little of what was said.
I have a very good relationship with President Putin. I think I have a very good relationship with President Zelensky. And now we're doing the deal, and we're going to be in there. We're going to be actually in there, digging our hearts out. And hopefully, we need the rare earth, and we have some here, but we don't have enough. Our economy is very strong, and we need a lot of things that, in some cases, we don't have here. So I think we're going to have a very good relationship, but the relationship between them is not the best.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question. You want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, the deal, if we get it, is going to be hugely important. I don't think it would have happened if the space hadn't been created for it by yourself. But if there's a deal in, we've got to make sure it's a deal that lasts, that is not temporary, that lasts, and that's why we need to make sure that it's secure, and we've lent in and said we'll play our part, and we've talked and we will talk about how we work with yourself, Mr. President, to ensure that this deal is something which is not violated, because it's very important that if there is a deal, we keep it.
And that will be, and I think I can say that will be the easy part. That's the part we look forward to, because putting security there, that's the part we all look forward to. That's easy. The difficult part is getting the deal made. So, but I think we've come a long way.
So that just a little of the exchange between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump in the Oval Office this morning, that first press avail that they had. Well, let's bring in now Patrick Bury. He's a former NATO analyst and expert in security and warfare. Patrick, thanks for joining us. A couple of mentions of NATO throughout the day. First, at one point, Donald Trump saying that NATO membership for Ukraine was definitely off the table. But he was also asked a question there in the press conference about whether he supported Article 5. And he said, I support Article 5, but it's not going to be needed. What did you draw from what you heard today?
Good evening, Katrina. Yes, I think the point he made about Ukraine and NATO is just reiterating what Secretary Hegseth said last week, so it wasn't really that new. The new thing since his visit with, or his hosting of Macron, was that he mentioned that Ukraine, he would like to see it get some or a lot of its land back. So that will probably go down well, especially in Ukraine and in the rest of Europe. So it's a little bit of a walk back from what Secretary Hegseth said in terms of Ukraine would definitely have to give up a lot of it, or a fair amount of its land, to 18% or so that Russia holds of it. So that's a bit of carrot and stick, as it were. On the NATO, yes, it was interesting that it came from a question from the press corps, and that he basically said, as you said, he supports Article 5. I mean, this is a result of a lack of clarity, really, since the Munich Security Conference, and the different messages coming from the US administration. On the one hand, Secretary Hegseth saying, we want to make NATO great again. But then on the other hand, Vance, the vice president, seeming to kind of distance himself from Europe. So clearly Macron and Starmer's visit and again Zelensky's, it's Europe week in the White House. They're all there basically trying to get a bit of clarity. It looks like they've got some more, but I don't think on this backstop, there's no clarity there yet.
And Patrick, there didn't seem to be any movement at all on that issue of this security underpinning, despite the best efforts of President Macron on Monday and Keir Starmer today. Donald Trump still saying, no, not even going to discuss that. We need to get a peace deal first.
Yeah, long finger stuff, isn't it? I mean, interestingly, from the British perspective, and I thought the Prime Minister it was very well prepared and very canny throughout these press conferences and the visit at least. But from the British perspective, they'll be happy that the President said the UK military was able to look after itself, but also he was there to help if needed. So there's a good indication there that at least some of the bilaterals and also the Article 5 are holding, but that is not going to be so far extended to anything inside any reassurance force that may deploy inside Ukraine. There's an interesting thing here as well that the President is trying to say, is that these contractors, and they would be basically contractors, i.e., extractive industry going into areas, some of which are in the Donbass, where a lot of the rare earths are, but certainly into Ukraine, and using them as some sort of almost guarantee that because these contractors are there, they would not be attacked by Russia. Like I've worked, giving advice to the extractive industry in previous work, and they tend to, depending on the profits to be made, they tend to move pretty fast out of high threat environments if there's a change. So the idea, I think, is somewhat questionable. I mean, it'd be very interesting to see how that would look. That this idea that just by having U.S. contractors on the ground in a rare earth mine would stop another go again by Putin. Questionable.
Or indeed in an active conflict situation, as it still is as we speak today. Patrick Bury, as ever, thanks for joining us here on BBC
Thank you.
News.
Okay, now joining us is our panel. Robbie Suave, senior editor at Reason magazine, Democratic strategist Joy Cheney, and also Leon Emirali, former UK ministerial aide and commentator. And I want to begin by thanking you all so much for your patience. You've been sitting there waiting, obviously, for quite a while we listened to the press conference. But let's get into some of the detail, because we don't have as much time tonight as we normally would with our panel. Robbie, interestingly, President Trump was talking about this in the press conference and earlier in the Oval Office when he was asked about those security guarantees we've heard about so much in the last week or so. He said he was open to many things, but first he wants to get Russia and Ukraine to agree a deal before being drawn on what measures would be in place to enforce it. It sounds a bit, though, like a chicken and egg situation. Surely you need those measures in place, potentially, before you can get the deal.
I think that's accurate. Now, we should all be happy, I think, depending on no matter where you are in this whole situation, that there have been now some successful negotiations taking place. The standpoint of so many in the Trump coalition in America is obviously that endless support for Ukraine cannot go on, and we don't want to commit American military service people to the defense of Ukraine. But it is interesting there, Trump obviously saying, well, if we have this minerals deal, then we'll want to defend our people who will be working there. But we also don't want to put our people in harm's way and get into some broader conflict with Russia because we have people on the ground and they're still interested in conquering Ukraine. So obviously what does have to happen next is conversations with Putin to bring an end to the conflict. So it's true that this does not get the deal done. However, I think it's a step in the right direction to get everybody on the same page and hopefully bring this war to an immediate conclusion.
Joy, from your perspective of watching what you heard from President Trump today and indeed the UK Prime Minister, did he kind of row back that shift in US foreign policy that we have seen the President and his administration make in the last few weeks?
Well, I mean, he certainly had to repair our reputation after what happened last week with the Vice President's speech and then his own comments, which he won't cop to this week, that he called President Zelensky a terrorist. So, yes, I mean, for that, it was, I think, a breath of relief for everyone in Europe that things are a little calmer this week. But we all know with Donald Trump that, there's always next week. So it's going to be chaotic, and we're going to have to learn to live in chaos for the foreseeable future with him in leadership. But yeah, I mean, all in all, it was a good meeting.
And Leon Emirali, let me bring you in. I was talking with one of our correspondents earlier about how much first President Macron's visit and now the UK Prime Minister's visit will have moved the needle in President Trump's mind ahead of this meeting with President Zelensky tomorrow. You know, once you actually get President Zelensky in the same room as President Trump and his team in the same room as the Trump team, do you think there is room for further progress on those security guarantees that President Zelensky clearly wants and that obviously France and the UK would like to see as well?
Well, there's definitely room for further progress. I think that's definitely what Zelensky wants to see. It's whether or not Donald Trump wants to give those concessions. But it's quite remarkable when you consider this week with Macron on Monday, Keir Starmer today, Zelensky tomorrow. This is going to be a week that will define Europe's future for many, many decades to come. And therefore, I think that parts 1 and 2 have gone extremely well. You know, I think that both the Macron meeting, both the Starmer meeting have gone incredibly well. It's now down to Zelensky. And I think what will be missing with the Zelensky meeting is the warmth between the two individuals. I think that we've seen that with both Macron and Starmer, you know, a huge amount of warmth between the two men there. But I do think that Zelensky and Trump have a slightly more frostier relationship, and that could be a hurdle to Zelensky getting what Ukraine wants in terms of that security guarantee.
Robbie, though, did we see a slight softening of that view of President Zelensky? I mean, President Trump was asked, oh, do you still think he's a dictator? And he said, oh, did I say that? Did I say that? And he also at another point said, I've got a lot of respect for President Zelensky. What do you think we'll see tomorrow?
We have to always keep in mind that this is how Trump operates. He comes from the world of business, of making deals, and also of entertainment. And his negotiating strategy is often to talk very tough on social media, confrontational, and then have a meeting of the minds when he actually sits down with the world leader. So I think, despite what he said about Zelensky earlier, I think there is going to be a desire to get a kind of deal, again, that brings the war to an end, that involves the U.S. jointly in an economic venture with Ukraine, does tie us to the fate of that country, but not in an open-ended, endless, just giving aid and arms to Ukraine, something that there is not a lot of appetite to do among the American people, particularly Republican-leaning American people anymore. But we will still be involved in the country of Ukraine, and we will work out some kind of security arrangement, maybe involving the rest of Europe, maybe and explicitly, certainly involving a conversation with Russia to not expand any further. Now, I think, unfortunately, Ukraine will not be getting back the territory that Russia has taken. That just seems very difficult to get from a negotiation standpoint. But good relations with Europe, despite the tough talk of last weekend and of recently. I think that is the Trump approach to diplomacy, and there is something to be said for it.
Well, let's pick up on the Trump approach to diplomacy with Joy. I mean, we don't know in as much detail, do we, what is going on in terms of conversations between the Trump administration and Russia. But here you have on the other side of this, these very visible contacts, France, UK, obviously President Zelensky tomorrow, as we've been discussing. I mean, do you think that is going to make a huge difference, actually, those in-person contacts, as opposed to contacts through a third party, through a close aide to Donald Trump, rather than the two men meeting?
Well, I mean, look, this is the second Trump administration, and people have figured him out. Anyone with, bargain basement psychology degree understands how to talk to him. You can flatter him, and that will, earn you great favor. And I think that many of them coming to him, kissing the ring just a little bit, is actually manipulative and will work in their favor. And I think that's what you're seeing this week. That's not unusual. That's common, and I think that's what you see with the extension of the invitation from King Charles. It allows him to say, I'm the only American president that's done all that. That is classic, theater that is needed to manipulate someone like Donald Trump it works. He has his own manipulations as well, and as my colleague here said, part of it is talking tough. President Zelensky also is an entertainer, and I think that tomorrow we're going to see a little bit of that as well. I'm sure he will come with his own bluster because he also has to return home, and he has to not only get something from this visit, but also show that they are not weak, and that they can stand up to a Donald Trump and a Russian president in Putin. So I think we're going to see a lot of that there. But yes, I think it always makes a difference to be in person, especially when you're dealing with Donald Trump. He wanted to see a little bit of that yielding.
And Leanne, on that point of how these visits play domestically, Joy's calling it political theatre. Maybe it's political theatre, maybe it's statecraft. How will this work for Keir Starmer back in the UK?
I think he'll be delighted. I think the number 10 team around him will be over the moon. It can't really have gone much better for Keir Starmer. I mean, there was a great deal of warmth between the two of them. There was an agreement, more or less, on the controversial Chagos Islands deal. There was talk of a trade deal between the UK and the US. I think the only bit of a cloud on that visit was the necessary security guarantees, the backstop that Keir Starmer would have wanted, perhaps something a little bit firmer, but maybe Zelensky can get that over the line tomorrow. So I think for Keir Starmer, it went incredibly well. He looked like the statesman. He had that moment of J.D. Vance where they spoke about free speech in the UK, and he was able to sort of shoot back at J.D. Vance and stand up for Britain's interests. So I think he did very well, and I think he'll be going home feeling pretty chuffed with himself.